Yes, good luck with that. Now, in 2003, Douglas Galbraith's wife abducted their children and took them back to her native Japan. It's been almost 10 years and Douglas doesn't know if he'll ever see them again.
Well, tragically, Douglas isn't alone. Headlines last week suggested that 240 such abductions could take place this year alone, with the number of families where at least one parent has links to a foreign country is on the rise.
Well, Douglas joins us now with child abduction expert David Allison, and welcome to both of you. Douglas, thank you for being here today. And we can just go back to the beginning of the story. When you first met your wife, Tomoko, you were both studying at Cambridge University.
That's right, yes.
Had a relationship together, got married in '96,
yeah.
And you had two sons, Satomi, who was 6 the last time you saw him,
That's
and Makoto,
right.
who was 4.
That's right.
And you were a home dad because you wrote from home.
That's right. I was self-employed as a professional writer, so I was there all the time. I was sort of with these boys almost literally every day of their life between being born and then being, disappearing in this abduction. So there were no sort of traditional gender roles. They had two parents who were equally at home in the home all the time, and very, very strong bonds with both those parents.
When you met each other at first at Cambridge and you started to go out with each other, was there ever a consideration for you thinking, well, this is an international relationship here?
There was, and for me, probably, I think for both of us, that was an additional attraction at that time. You always start these things with a degree of optimism, which in retrospect one might say is naivete, but you start with optimism. We were in a very international environment. Tomoko was the person who had come furthest to be there, away from her home culture. She was studying English literature. She was intellectually very impressive. She was taking a higher degree in someone else's language. So I was attracted to her for those reasons, and I think that seemed to be an additional aspect of it to me. And I think we both, at that time, probably thought there wasn't really a risk of culture coming between us. At that stage, I think the real difference is that, of course, there were no children. We didn't have plans at that stage, but when they arrive, the children, very often they become territory, and you may have thought that your culture wasn't that important. Suddenly it rears its, I'd say, quite ugly head sometimes, and it becomes suddenly very much more powerful than you ever thought it would for yourself.
How did it start to show itself in your home?
The language was a key. There was a whole series of small, constant battlegrounds and frictions within the home that caused mounting problems. Language was one. Obviously, the children were bilingual when they were taken. One of the things I regret most that a lot of these children are bilingual and they lose one of their languages when they're abducted, and they shrink down to being just a monolingual child. So these were Japanese and English-speaking children, a little bit more Japanese than English. I remember a headmistress of the primary school saying to me at one point, "Why did he speak a bit more Japanese than English? Is it because they spend more time with their mother than with their father?" And that wasn't true, because you're both in the home exactly the same amount of time.
Do you speak Japanese?
Only very, very little. I had the vocabulary of a 3-year-old or 4-year-old when Makoto was 4, and now I've lost it a bit as well. But the reason why they spoke more Japanese really was because Tomoko was very assertive in insisting on the Japanese language.
Well, you say that
she
they
would speak
watched
over anyone who spoke English to them.
Really? And you say that you watched a lot of Japanese television. There was a huge Japanese influence in your life. She
began to live in a sort of private Japan of her own making. And I think this is one of the warning signs if people are in mixed culture marriages. If someone is withdrawing from the culture around them and beginning to create their own version of their home in their minds around them, that is a clear warning sign. Tomoko had satellite TV that was Japanese. Here was a woman that would watch the weather forecast for Osaka in Japan and then go outside and get wet because she didn't know what the reality was outside the door.
Almost in denial, slightly. You became very suspicious. I mean, you even hid their passports at one point.
I had the boys' British and their Japanese passports, so clearly there was a risk, which I had long recognised and tried to do something about. Tomoko got duplicate passports from the Japanese consulate in Edinburgh, which clearly asked no questions at all about consent from the other parent. And this is quite an issue, I think. Consulates issue these passports without any question as to where the other parent is or whether they should give consent. And it makes abduction very, very easy.
So in 2003, in July 2003, you go away on a business trip and you come back and you would expect them to sort of be there to meet you, and they're not there to meet you. And you go home and the house, it's dark and the curtains are open. You go in and it's an empty house, and you say you knew straight away what had happened.
Yes, it was the last chapter of a story that had built up to this point, so it didn't come completely out of the blue. You're in two minds. One is that it's completely shocking because you don't think it's going to happen then. If you did, you would have done something about it. You wouldn't have let it happen. And I think a lot of the left-behind parents really reproach themselves with the feeling that they didn't protect their children well enough. They were easy to deceive. They made it too easy for the other parent. So I went through the house. It was empty. There was a Royal Mail redirection notice on the doormat. I opened it. It was addressed to Tomoko, and it said, "We are pleased to acknowledge your new address in Osaka, Japan." So it didn't require any detective work. It was very obvious what had happened. And because of the whole personal history and cultural history leading up to this, I knew from that day that I would probably not see my children again until they could regain control of their own lives.
You did manage to get in contact with her. I mean, you tried various different
By
routes,
phone, yeah.
and in this venture, through the university, you managed to track her down. And after many conversations with her, you finally agreed that you could speak to the boys over the phone every fortnight.
That's right.
That's incredibly tough from a father that has been so much part of his two sons' lives and seeing them every hour of every day to suddenly now having fortnightly phone calls from the other side of the world.
Yes.
Must have been very tough on both parties, actually.
Well, it's very tough on the children. The children lose an enormous amount. They lose one of their parents, they lose half of their extended family, they lose half of their cultural inheritance and one of their languages. So they lose a great deal. Fortnightly telephone contact is good as these cases go. A lot of people don't have that. And that ended about 3 years ago, and there's been nothing since then, ended without explanation.
And you say, I mean, it's a terribly sad part where you Google Earth where they are and
right.
look to see them, maybe see them on a map.
That's right. I've sort of digitally toured Toyonaka, which is an area of northern Osaka, on Google Earth, and the Street View system to see people standing at bus stops. They're all slightly blurred, the faces, for reasons of confidentiality, which is rather ironic. Every direction you turn, you seem to be blocked for one reason or another. So you can feel sometimes very close to them because of this modern telecommunications technology.
Did you think of going?
I thought of going, well, there are 2 times. Immediately after the abduction, I had this address, which was a temporary address. They were only going to be there for about 10 days or so. I thought, shall I jump on a plane? Shall I go out there? Of course, I thought about it. And going through my mind, I thought, try to envisage it, how far do you get, up to the point of the locked apartment door, the outer apartment building door? You're waiting there for probably the police to turn up, having been given Tomoko's version of the story. And you explain yourselves to them, and there's nothing you can do other than hang around outside the building. There'll be people listening to this story who think, well, Japan is pretty extreme, but I can't get a contact order enforced, and my children are 30 miles away across the other side of town. And it doesn't help going around to hang around outside that home. You have to have some sort of compromise.
And also, they'll be 15 and how old are they?
They're now 15 and 13.
13, yeah.
There are Hague countries, David. These countries that have an agreement, an understanding. Japan is not one of them.
No, it's not. No.
Which makes it even more difficult.
It makes it really hard, yes. I mean, the Hague Convention basically sets up a system that recognises that decisions concerning children should be made in the country of their habitual residence. So if Japan were a signatory to the Hague Convention in Douglas's situation, then he'd be able to apply through the central authority in England, transmitted to Japan, and there would be an application for return of the children to Scotland, as it was in his circumstances. And there's also obligations in terms of finding the children. But there's a lot of countries, Japan being the principal one in terms of the sort of the Western world, that isn't a signatory. And it is pretty difficult in those cases. There are some countries that we have protocols with, for example, Pakistan. There's a judicial protocol that enables us to recover children despite them not being a signatory to the Hague Convention. But most countries that aren't signatories, it's really hard.
I want to actually use Douglas's own words here in a question to you, because he says this is a problem of our time. Globalization brings couples together, but cultural identity pulls them apart. And we are now much more global. We travel much more. We study much more in far-flung corners of the earth. You can fall in love and forget, maybe naively, that there is a cultural difference between you.
Absolutely, and it's increasingly a problem, as you say. We're increasingly in an international society. I'm based in central London, so an awful lot of my clients are, one or other of them is from a foreign jurisdiction, and that does create tensions, as you say, at a time when things go wrong. hopefully most people do it well, and they find ways to enable them both to have a relationship with the children after the separation.
So if just to I mean, unfortunately we always run out of time, which is a shame, but what do you do in a nutshell if you think this is going to be an issue and you can see this as Douglas did rearing on the horizon? What do you do?
Well, it's really hard, isn't it? Because you know, Douglas wanted to save his marriage, and that's an entirely understandable position to be in. He took the sensible step in taking the passports. Anything more than that does get a bit confrontational. You can get orders from the court to stop abduction, you can issue a port alert system, but then the marriage is pretty much at an end if you're doing that stuff. What Resolution stands for, which is the organisation I'm representing today, is really better parent education, better parent support, so that parents, when their relationship is in difficulty, get the support that they need, and they take expert advice to help them deal with issues.
Well, we'll put those
concerning
details
their
on our
children.
website, because I know that certainly you feel you have been let down, and that story is in this book. And it's my son Douglas's story. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. I'm so sorry. The time has run out. I do hope that eventually you manage to be reunited with your son.
I do too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're back after the break.